Happy post-Labor Day, BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Sean Fitz with us right now. Nate Bauer joining in just a moment. We have, and I say this all the time, we got a big show for you today. The way the calendar works out with James Franklin's press conference on Monday and our first show on Tuesday, we got a lot of stuff to chew through today. James Franklin's press conference, it's our first chance to actually recap the game together. And of course, we're going to get into some other things throughout the show. So first off, Sean Fitz, welcome back to the show. How are you doing? How was the trip down to Morgantown this weekend?
Trip to Morgantown was great. I had a great chauffeur in Nate Bauer, and we got on the road a little bit later than expected. Of course, a 2-hour rain delay will do that, or lightning delay, I guess it was. Will do that. But no, wonderful situation. We're kind of detached from the fans, and I saw some of the gratuitous stuff that was being yelled and all that kind of stuff, but we didn't have to deal with that. I think everybody that we ran across at West Virginia was first class. They did a really good job. I enjoyed the atmosphere, even with the lightning, even with all that stuff. And yeah, enjoyed the game when it was not as stressful as many imagined, especially leading up to that 7.5 line last week. I still can't get over it, but we'll talk more about West Virginia here. And as Nate restarts his internet and gets rid of his technical difficulties.
Yeah, it works out because we always start the show with Fitz's recruiting update, and Nate always has technical issues, so we can get through the first couple of minutes pretty smooth. So, like I said, ton to get through today, including the BWI Mailbag at the end of the show. So get your comments, your questions, your concerns all in now so we can get to them later. But let's get to Fitz's recruiting update. So yesterday, Fitz and I went live here, impromptu thing on Labor Day, as Penn State got some good news. You can check out that video to get the full breakdown. We're going to give you the highlights here to start. I imagine that's where we're starting today, Fitz, with your update?
Yeah, I think so. If you caught us yesterday live, great. If not, hopefully you caught that replay on YouTube. But we had to talk about a commitment, fairly impromptu. I called you up a little bit before, said, hey, this is going to go live, and all of a sudden it's a big one. Matthew Outten flips from Virginia Tech to Penn State. This is a guy that we spent a lot of time talking about in the summer. Actually, prior to the summer as well. T. Frank, we broke down our favorite wide receiver prospects, and he was both top 3 for us, I think.
I believe so.
I believe he was number 2 behind Quincy Porter for me. Yeah, he's quite good. Different kind of player than Penn State has recruited in the past. I reached out to somebody this morning, and I was like, hey, has Penn State recruited a guy in this mold before? Because you can't really look at him. I tried to find a comp, and I really couldn't. I said Cam Seldon, who is at Tennessee now, bigger guy that can move sort of like a running back. You could also play outside. Cam Seldon, of course, is a running back at Tennessee now, even though he's hurt. But yeah, it was tough to find one. And I think that's fine because this guy, if you put on the tape, he looks really good. We got him as an 89 3-star on 3. I gotta say that's not my favorite rating of his. A guy that makes plays sort of like a running back playing receiver, kick return, punt return, does all these sort of things. I like watching him because this is a guy who harnesses the speed that he has, and he's more than fast enough, but he goes and gears down, he gears up, and he gets going. I mean, he's just a player that has a natural feel for how fast he has to move. And if you watch, we talk Nick Singleton all the time. Nick Singleton's really fast, and he did a good job of it this weekend. But like when you can harness when you need to go, and you go, that's a big thing. So I look at Matthew Outten, and in that type of form, he's about 6'1", 6'1", 205, 210 in there somewhere. So not a lot of builds coming through like that. It's interesting to me. The guy that I kept coming back to from a Penn State comp point of view is Quentin Martin. And we saw Quentin Martin sort of toe that line between running back and receiver. And now we've got a guy that toes that line between receiver and running back. But you go back to it, Marcus Higgins, I think fantastic job sticking with this one all the way from when he committed to Virginia Tech. I think they gave him a little bit of cooling off period and then, went right back to it. And Penn State finished second the first time around. And now they finished first the second time around. So I think it's a big pickup for Penn State. He's one of my favorites in the class immediately.
A guy that reminds me just from movement skills, and this is a very lazy comparison. I think Quentin Martin is the better one, but I keep thinking about Trey Wallace in terms of big, physical, fast enough, except that Matthew Outten is 210 pounds already. Like 205. We haven't listed as 210. He's north of 200 pounds coming in to college. So I think, as you mentioned, the running back skills, that is a separation factor there as an athlete, but a guy who is an athlete first here in high school. So all those things are very good. There's a lot of reasons why he is one of our favorites from the receiving class, and overall one of the most fun watches from the class of 2025 this summer. Anything else here on Matthew Outten you want to get into, or do you want to get into the next update you got for us?
Yeah, I think we'll get into the next stuff because I think we have a lot to talk about today, recruiting and more so team stuff. But Steve Wilfong put in a pick last night for Malachi Goodman to end up at Penn State. That's a big one, isn't it? This is
Yes.
This is a guy that Ryan and I have labeled as probably the top guy on the board for Penn State on either side of the ball in terms of uncommitted guys. They're going to circle around and try and flip some more guys as the season progresses. But you look back at my notes from last week, and we talked Goodman in Penn State. We talked Matthew Outten. There's a lot of good things going for Penn State right now. So Goodman has been one of the top guys on the board. He plays tackle in high school. I don't know if he's got the tackle measurements. He's got a lot of things going for him. I think he could play a couple different positions up front. But if you can get him to stick at tackle, that's certainly would be very good. Auburn in there, USC to a lesser degree. But it seems like the chatter is favoring Penn State right now, unless there's a complete shock move or something like that. I think it's fairly clearly favoring Penn State. In terms of a decision, we expected one 2 weeks ago. We expected maybe one last week, and now we'll expect maybe one this week. If not, Paramus Catholic has a bye week next week, so maybe that's a situation where he's trying to get it out of the way and not be a distraction or whatever for his team. I think that makes sense as well. So, but I think it's pretty clearly trending to Penn State. It's one of those ones where you look at the offer list, you look at the options that he had, the visits that he took, and he took official visits to Alabama and Georgia. They wanted him. It wasn't quite what he wanted. I think he's a lower key guy. I think he's more of I don't want to say homebody because, he's considering USC and considering Auburn, but I think he's more that type of guy. So I think that a lot of things of what Penn State does, and I know he loves Phil Troutwine, sort of align with what he's looking for in a school. So I do think Penn State in a good spot with Malachi Goodman, with a decision coming at some point. Can't really pinpoint that one right now.
Gotcha. And we'll keep you updated as that saga continues. Honestly, we've had so many of those that I thought it was this week that he was going to make the decision, that we talked about that last week, but it's just been a recurring theme here. I know there's one more thing you wanted to get to today here on the recruiting update.
Just check out the site, blueillustrated.com. Ryan's got a visitor list shaping up. A couple of really, really good sophomores confirmed for this weekend. Won't be a huge list, but honestly, a better list than I expected for a 12 o'clock kickoff against the MAC team. So stay tuned to Blue White Illustrated. Of course, check out our sales. Check out code PSU1 because this is the way to get it. This is the way to get the news. Matthew Outten did not come out of nowhere. Malachi Goodman, he's not committed to Penn State, but did not come out of nowhere. Just stay ahead of the game. Stay with Blue White Illustrated.
And now I know Eggman in the chat is wondering exactly where he is. David K, super fan. Nate Bauer joins the show just in time.
You know what? It's no wonder his internet doesn't work. He's running 6 different accounts on YouTube right now, demanding more Nate Bauer. So that makes sense.
But I know both of you guys had a chance to go and check out some new stuff at Anti-Fragile, right, Fitz?
That's right. There's a visitor list shaking up for recruiting this weekend, but there's also a visitor list for Penn State fans coming into town this weekend. And hey, you get in there on Friday, you get to your Airbnb, you get to your hotel, you say, what am I going to do? You're going to go down to Anti-Fragile, grab a cheesesteak, grab a beer. Nate and I went down last Friday. I was down there on Sunday, making it a habit of supporting our people that support us, and in the meantime, drinking beer, which is a win-win if you really look at it. But we've got a lot to look forward to this weekend. I love the home game weekends. Get in there on Friday afternoon, be in there on Friday evening. It's a great setup. If you're watching the YouTube, you see John's are there. They're making improvements to their cheesesteak roll, which I think were already great. Nate and I got to sample one last week, get a little bit more firmness in that roll. And the test run was approved, I would say. They've been working with Gemelli bread. It's all local stuff. It's all quality stuff. And we really love those cheesesteaks. John's are open Tuesday through Sunday, starting at 11 a.m. And they're open late nights, Friday and Saturday. You want a late night cheesesteak? That is your place. We've also got collaborations coming. Anti-Fragile has collaborated with Braylock. They've got a hazy IPA coming this weekend. Electric Atmosphere will be on draft. And then Death by Mango with one of my personal favorites, Warwick Farm in Southeast PA. They do fantastic stuff as well. Death by Mango is coming in cans and in draft this weekend. So check out Anti-Fragile. I'm sure I will be stopping by at some point this weekend. Nate, when you get done your round of golf on Friday, maybe we'll hit that up. But yeah, always a good time. Always appreciative of their support. And yeah, get there on Friday. Go to the bartender. Erica will be working behind the bar. You say, hey, we heard about it on the podcast, and they told us to come down. Like I said, it's not going to get you a discount, but it will make them feel good. It will make them feel like their advertising dollars are worth it. Our goal right now is to get them a line. You know, some of these bars in town, they have lines. Anti-Fragile has not had a line. That is our challenge right now. I talked to John, the owner, Sunday. He wants a line there. So get a line, get there, and get some beer. It's great.
It is. It makes me so jealous I can't have gluten, guys. This is every time you guys text me like, "Hey, we're at Anti-Fragile having a cheesesteak, talking to John." I'm like, ugh! Nate, how was you? You were texting me from there last time. How was it?
It's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
What do you
what
think the answer is? No.
I just wanted you to say something before we got to between the lines.
Well, I mean, listen, I don't want to make, I don't want to be contrarian, but part of the appeal is that they don't have a line, right? Like one of the most magical things about walking in there is that it's so friendly and inviting, right? I don't know if you guys are aware, but over the weekend, State College had what would you call it? Bar tours, of which created massive lines outside many of the town's establishment. And that's just not my vibe. That's not what I'm going for, as opposed to Anti-Fragile, which I absolutely am. So
anyway. Ruin Nate's weekend. Let's get a line over at Anti-Fragile.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
We got a lot of things here in between the lines. James Franklin talked yesterday, so we're going to get to some of those comments. The first one here about Smith Vilbert. Not only he went beyond, he had a good game and said something that I took note of, and I think a lot of people should have taken note of when he mentioned the performance and what's to come.
A big part of it, it's understandable, right? He missed essentially 2 years of football, but you're talking about a guy who was a high-level basketball player when we recruited him. He's 6'6", he's 280 pounds. He can run, he can bend, he's aggressive, and he's mature. You got a mature football player. So I think you guys are going to continue to be talking about him a lot this year. I think there'll be a lot of conversations about him, on a national scale as well.
Nate, a national scale for Smith Vilbert. What are your thoughts on this particular topic?
Yeah, I think that he's a guy who, so let's rewind a little bit to the spring. And I'm not sure how aware of it fans are, but other teams in the portal era are trying to poach everyone, but especially depth, right? Guys who might not have a clear line to a starting role are the types of guys that other teams can pursue, because they could say, hey, you might have an opportunity at more playing time at our place than you do at yours currently. And so Smith was, as I understand it, among those guys this spring. And you might say, well, because he's not in the public consciousness, you haven't seen him play. Why would he be appealing? Well, he's appealing for the reasons that James Franklin laid out, which is he's 290 pounds and he moves the way that T-Frank that you laid out, right? He's a 6'6", 290-pound defensive end. They do not grow on trees. And so to have this guy on your roster and available to make plays for you, to provide depth for you. One of the things that stood out to me about Amin Vanover after the blue-white game, talking to him was, look, like part of the conversation this offseason was Abdul Carter kind of leapfrogging the line, right? And so what does that do to depth? How does that make those guys that have been around for a while feel about their opportunity? And Amin was very clear-throated, saying, we're all going to eat. Every single one of us is going to have an opportunity. Deion Barnes is going to go through waves. And in the first game of the season against an opponent that demanded good defensive end play, That's exactly what they did.
I want to put this up here because Michael McCullen says, if you're tight, do the dollar deal. You're in the heart of it, and there's no better value or content out there. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to a new segment on the show, which is called Nate Was Right. Here is Nate being right on the Blue White Illustrated message board. We have a weekly chat on Fridays, and people can ask any question of anyone on the staff. Somebody asked, which fifth-year player has the best chance at a notable breakout? Nate Bauer responds, Smith Vilbert. So, ladies and gentlemen, Nate was right.
What was the date? What was the date on that?
Do we have it here? I don't have it here.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes,
July,
you do.
July 19th. There it is.
Woo!
July 19th. Take a victory lap, my friend.
This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I just shower it on me. I love it. Fitz, what do you think of this segment?
It's wonderful. Yeah, I definitely didn't come up with that. No, I mean, it's it makes sense, and it's really interesting to look at what we heard all off season, and a lot of it came to fruition this weekend. But Smith Vilbert was one of those ones that Nate and I had talked before. We're like, do we buy this? And we're like, well, the way that they're hammering it home, and this was on record, off record, whatever you want to call it. This was a situation where Penn State was confident in this guy, and we're like, okay, well, he hasn't played in 2 years, and when he did play, he was fine. In a really good Outback Bowl that was probably a bit misleading, and
yeah.
But like,
I want to jump in there, Fitz. Right after that game, James Franklin downplayed Smith Vilbert's performance and said, like, yeah, that's great, we're happy for those sacks, but the context wasn't necessarily indicative of future success, and here it is now, the exact opposite.
I mean, that's and it's still one of those ones where it's like, okay, how does this work against, great offensive lines? That Penn State's going to be measured against the top teams they go up against, and we will see how that goes. It was interesting to me. He made some really good plays on Saturday. The sack was like middle of the pack for me. The strip sack, like that was a good play. He didn't do anything outlandish or anything like that. I mean, and he was playing, I think, against a backup at that point. So like, yes, I would pump the brakes on that. But like the body of work, which is more important, is promising. And I can also say the same thing about Amin Vanover. We'll probably talk about Abdul Carter a little bit later in terms of what we took away from that performance. But yeah, I mean, if you can get 4 of those guys, it's kind of like running back. Like you're going to see a lot of those snaps from both sets. And on a day like, or at least on a first half, like Saturday, when it was 85 degrees, sunny and humid, they rotated them through like crazy, and they benefited from it.
Yeah. So the next thing here in James Franklin's press conference, this was almost the first thing out of his mouth. We're not talking enough about the defense.
One of the things I think was interesting is if you do a statistical comparison between our West Virginia game last year and our West Virginia game this year, no one's really talking about our defense, and our defense really played well. If you look last year, we gave up 15 points. This year we gave up 12. So we were better in that. We were better in points per possession. We were better in explosive plays. We were better in total yards allowed. We were better in rushing yards allowed.
And he kept going and going and going. I just cut it off about a third of the way through in the areas in which they were better than last year. Nate, what's your opinion of that? Is that the quality of the opponent changing, even though it's the same team, or is that something different? Is that truly this defense is as good, if not better, than it was last year?
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell if it's as good or better than last year, but I think that his perception is, look, he gets feedback, right? Like people are talking to him. He hears things that are happening outside of the football building, and so while the reaction inside of Lash on Sunday was, man, can you believe how well Jalen Reed played? Can you believe how well, including Abdul Carter, played? Right? Like that stands in contrast to the conversation that's happening externally, which says, man, not sure about the move. I mean, even on our message board, not sure about the move of Abdul Carter to defensive end. And letting West Virginia move the ball between the 20s, which is something that happened. Some of the chunk plays that happened, right? It's almost as though Penn State, because it played so well last year, that the expectations are, okay, yeah, you held West Virginia to 12 points. That's expected. He's saying very much so, no, that was a great performance. Like you're undervaluing, you're under recognizing how good Penn State's defense was on Saturday. And I think importantly and more meaningfully to the conversation, the way it sets the tone for what's to come. Because if they played that well against a pretty good West Virginia team with some capable offensive pieces and still made the errors that they did and still had some of the lapses that they did, some of the penalties that, right, they don't want those. They acknowledge that. It really kind of sheds some light into what he thinks they can be moving forward this season.
Fitz, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, West Virginia wasn't the threat that we thought it was, because the threat that we thought it would be Garrett Green running the football. And I think West Virginia made a conscious decision to keep him out of trouble, basically, from that. And I know that sometimes the quarterback, is going to scramble mode and do all that kind of stuff, but actually made some really nice throws on the run. His receivers sometimes helped him, sometimes didn't. But yeah, I think they did. They clearly had a plan to contain that. And then they're so good that it contained everything else, if that makes sense. Like the secondary stuff sort of took care of itself. The speed really got Penn State. I mean, there was, I know one guy on the board was like, I didn't think Penn State's rushing defense was that great. I think the standard is so incredibly high. Well, let me find. The standard is so incredibly high that when you rip off a 9-yard gain, I think the long run was 11 or something like that. When you rip those chunks off, and that's pretty much all you get out of your running game, subconsciously you think that Penn State had some holes in that defense. But you look back, 3 yards of carry, something, I believe it was just south of 3 yards of carry. That wasn't the case at all. So it was encouraging to see. I think some of the issues that may pop up are not things that will catch us by surprise. The linebacker depth, they played a lot of Elsdon and DeLuca this week, and a lot of the backups. Tamir Robinson got hurt before halftime, didn't play in the second half, so didn't see him out there. But I think that's something that's worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, that defensive line as a whole, the backside pursuit was phenomenal. Like I was just watching the cut ups there, and Denai Dennis Sutton on the backside was quite good. So when you've got that kind of speed, when you can move laterally against an offense like that, you're going to have a performance like they did. And yeah, we're probably taking the defense for granted because it's been at such a high level for so long. It's not really the talking points that we want to get into, because we want to needle the offense and see what kind of improvement is there. So I think there's credence to the statement from Franklin, just because that bar is so incredibly high. And they lived up to it on Saturday.
It's an interesting thing, because I think when you talk about run defense, it's a holistic thing. The defensive line was excellent. The linebackers at times, I do think if there was one area, that was the area that struggled on Saturday. So usually when we talk about run defense, everyone wants to point to the Penn State defensive tackles still at this point, because anything that goes between the tackles is their fault, even though run defense, that's fundamentally not how that works at all. So that's an interesting dichotomy with how they played. And I think that your comment about the long run of the day being 11 yards, there was really like one that wasn't a quarterback designed carry, which is basically set up that if you have a scrambling quarterback or a mobile quarterback like Garrett Green, you automatically get a gap on the defense, and it takes an exceptional effort by somebody to blow it up. Schematically, you are always at a disadvantage there. Other than that, like you make the great point, and I just looked it up quickly, including the sacks, 2.3 yards per carry for West Virginia. They had 85 yards on the ground. That's not only is that not a recipe for them to win, that's not a recipe for any team to win.
Yeah, and when I was struggling with the three, I always like to do it without the sacks, and it's tough because they don't have the adjusted at the ready. So 100 yards, so 2.9 yards per carry. There it is, 100 yards without the sacks in there. So it's pretty good.
Let's we're gonna get on to our next conversation point, which is Penn State and West Virginia. Get into our thoughts of the recap and what happened with the Nittany Lions and the Mountaineers on Saturday. So let's start with the conversation around Trey Wallace. And this leads us into our next conversation point, our next episode of Nate Was Right.
just as many times as you possibly can.
This is gonna get funnier every single time. Nate, tell us about what you were right about here.
Star in the making returning, healthy star in the making returning, right? How he impacts everything that they do, how he would have impacted everything that they did last year, but was not available to do so. Look, a couple of things. We can't really run this graphic on this because Penn State's been saying this. This isn't something that's like deep, dark secrets, under the radar. It's just a matter of whether or not it was going to come to fruition. But it has been painfully obvious for months and months and months, even I would argue last season, that Trey Wallace was the number one that they expected to have last year. And it didn't happen, right? It didn't happen last year, but him being back and being healthy was one that very much so the program was tying its offense and passing fortunes to being tied to him, right? Like he needed to be there. And so I think that you saw on Saturday in terms of targets and then in terms of what actually happened, very much so. What's everybody laughing at? I need to know now.
Someone put up a Nate was wrong.
About what?
This show last week. Omari.
What about it? Well, that's true. No, well, not really. Kind of. Maybe a little bit. Anyway, I think Trey Wallace though is obviously a critical piece of what Penn State wants to do offensively, and him being able to make plays in that scenario is again something that looks forward to something that they think is going to come to fruition this season.
We got a great transition point here because Tito Oki, who that is somebody new that I haven't recognized here before on the BWI Live Show. Always love to welcome new members to the show or to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com when we get the opportunity. So first off, thank you for the donation to the channel. And got a question here. Hey, Fitz, how about that floated to the back shoulder touchdown? Are we considering that a fade in the end zone?
Not really, but I will take it as one, I guess. I mean, it was a more direct fade than they floated back shoulder. I mean, that was a great throw. I mean, you could not have. There were a couple throws on Saturday that we will see on draft highlight reels because they were that good. I think of the out to Trey Wallace earlier in the game. That was ridiculous, and it looked effortless. And of course, the 50-yard touchdown. But this one, hey, Penn State has a receiver making contested catches. And I know we said baby steps coming into the season in terms of what that group can do, but Trey kind of went and sort of flipped the whole thing on its head with just one half of football. Now, of course, he's going to have to continue that and string that along. And I think he has more big performances ahead of him. And I think that, just staying on the field is certainly the thing that everybody's going to be watching with him. But yeah, to be able to get up, control that. I know Neil Brown didn't think it was a catch, which is, I mean, his post game was, he played a different game in his head, I think, than was played on the field. But other than that, Trey Wallace went up, made a contested catch, and that's what this group needs.
Absolutely.
More of that from more people. And I know T. Frank on the post game show, which, by the way, Nate and I listened to it on the way back from Morgantown the other night. This guy doing 50 minutes by himself on a game that just ended is ridiculous. So, but this is one of the things he pointed out was, yes, the receivers need to be a little bit more prevalent. There were only 18 passes thrown, of course, but 9 of those went to Trey Wallace. I think 4 or 5 went to Omari Evans, and then no other targets for the receivers. So that's going to be something that the rest of the group has to work on. But when you've got a number one like Trey that can make those things, and when we saw it with Dotson a couple of years ago, when they can make those contested catches, just makes everybody better. And when the guy there is putting it in the right spot, when Drew's confident and putting it in the right spot,
and giving them chances.
Right. And if you look at that, I mean, that whole 35-second drill or whatever. Okay, so Penn State runs the football, and then Penn State goes back to, I guess, kind of a play action. West Virginia was, I think, expecting them to run it in the line. And given what we've seen from Penn State in the last several years, I think all three of us were as well. Like, that makes sense. But the coverage made no sense. There you get single coverage downfield against a guy that runs a 4-3. I hate to invoke Corey Geiger here, but just chuck it up, see what happens. And they did that, and that was by design, but they did that, and they did it well. You can argue about the pass interference, not pass interference. I think they both ran into each other. But hey, man, that was a play that needed to be made, and you had receivers making that play. And then the next play, the Wallace touchdown, you got cover one, or maybe even cover zero. I mean, why not take a shot like that? Because it was a situation where you needed to get to the end zone quick, and that's a quick throw. It makes a lot of sense. And then when the guy goes up and gets it, makes you feel a lot better about what you're doing. And hey, you gotta shout it out to the officiating staff, because the drive prior for West Virginia was the god awful spot that was just. I watched it back this morning. I'm like, how did this happen?
It's unreal, the number of obvious spots they missed.
Yeah, but West Virginia's able to kick a field goal, put them in position to do that, and sort of the waterfall took over from there. So it was fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, you take a back shoulder fade when a guy can go up and catch it like that and win that battle. Like that is what's been sorely missing the last couple of years, is winning that battle.
And the chemistry between the receiver and the quarterback is something that has also been missing. And I think that's a great sign with Trey Wallace of those plays. They're on the same page about the back shoulder, where you've got to know, like, hey, I've got to look backside for this based on where the defensive back is where Drew throws the football. If you don't have those details down, that is an incomplete pass, and it looks like a bad play by the quarterback. It's actually something that I tried to ask James Franklin ham-handedly about yesterday, where there were some plays it seemed like they were still just a little bit off in terms of Drew seemed to be throwing to a spot and Trey wasn't at that spot 100% of the time. So I think there's both good and areas of improvement with that. Or Drew was just inaccurate on a couple of throws, and I'm giving him too much of the benefit of the doubt there. I found that part of the passing game encouraging and fascinating to see what it is when you have a number one receiver and you have a quarterback who's competent and talented and can see the field really well, and they're on the same page for a good chunk of the game. I think that bodes well for Penn State in the long run. Nate, I want to ask you about this, because you guys were there on the ground for the first and second half in the transition. How hot was it in the first half, and how much were they trying to keep guys fresh?
That's a great question. I did not leave the press box, so it's pretty comfortable in the press. Pretty comfortable in the press box. Although the sun glaring through, it was hot. It was obviously hot in the first half. I don't know how much it cooled off because of the rain. Later on it was much better, certainly, but also at that point it was 6:30 at night, right? I mean, it was a different time of day. So I think that certainly Penn State made an effort to at least defensively sub a ton, right? I'm just, the thing that I would be curious about is like receivers, how much they ran through those guys. I didn't see the rep counts. But did Denmark play?
No.
Liam had 21 snaps. He was limited. Caden didn't play. So it was a lot of 12, but a lot of the first two guys. And Julian actually played as much as Omari, I believe.
Yeah. I think my assessment is that the 5 that you thought they were going to go with is what it is, right? That's the reality, is they've got 5 receivers that they're going to play quite a bit, of whom 2 were hurt pretty obviously on Saturday.
Yeah. And that all leads into something I'm going to write about today on the Blue White Illustrated over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Where was Julian Fleming on Saturday? What Nate just alluded to, I think, and what James Franklin alluded to in his press conference, all of that plays together, which is why you need to subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com right now. You missed the week and a half, basically, of 50% off, but because you're listening here on the podcast, by the way, podcast audience, we love you, and we're doing our best to expand our audience there as well, so hopefully we're reaching new people there. So code PSU1, 2 months for $1, gets you into bluewhiteillustrated.com. You're going to get basically the full season at this point for $1. I don't know what else I could tell you. It's a trial run, but it's a trial run during the most important time of the year, and then you can choose to subscribe, and I would hope that you would after getting all of the good stuff for $1, because we bring you the best Penn State football content anywhere. Fitz, what do you want to talk about?
One more thing here, right? Ryan, who is a regular contributor, said if Drew doesn't underthrow Omari, he was gone for a long touchdown. There was about 70 air yards under that ball. I mean,
it didn't look long because he threw it so far.
He let go of the 18. I think Omari caught it at the 22 on the other side. And it was, of course, there's an angle there. But guys, come on. I know we expect perfection from this show, but like 70 air yards, that's you're not going to lead a guy and throw it 75, is that for a 4-3 guy. So come on, let's dial it back a little bit here. But no, I mean, it was great. Jeff Rice actually had the same take, so I had to go in on that one. He texted me that during the game. So
it's interesting, Fitz. It's because on the camera, on the broadcast, it didn't look like it was that long. You don't realize for some reason, because I didn't realize it was 70 yards in the air either.
The broadcast had it going to Trey. And then I was like,
yeah,
here's the ball now. So that's kind of why that happened. But no, I mean, I think just the play in general, like you don't expect Penn State to do that. Like he usually goes into the locker room, especially on the road, in a game that's fairly tight, in a game that was very similar to last year's first half, minus the missed field goals. Like Penn State was dominant, but at the same time, you thought a few more points would be there. But hey, man, I'm here for it. So that's where we're going with that. And you got a couple big Zamboni references out of it, and you go on to the next one.
This one? Go ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
Just one minor interjection that I took. I paid close attention to what Franklin said about Omari and being proud of him for his physicality, specifically on that play.
Yeah,
and to me, this is hypothesizing a little bit, but just given his trajectory and the narrative of Omari over the last year and a half-ish, really his career at Penn State, if that had been offensive pass interference, James Franklin would have been just as proud of Omari for that play, right? If he would have decked that kid and knocked him over and not caught the pass, that would have been okay, just because Omari's been bullied in the past, right? Yeah. He just has not been that type of guy. And so to get that out of him, like the number of things that I can think of that James Franklin likely left Saturday's experience feeling really good about, that is right up there, along with Drew being a dude, right? Like being more assertive as a person.
Yeah, and I think just the passing game as a whole, you look at those things and they all come together to make you feel very encouraged about this particular game. And one of the things I found when doing the replay and watching all the plays back, which, by the way, Sunday Film Study, both the article and the thread, which is entirely too long, I understand. If you don't want to read the whole thing, you can read the article, which is still over 1,000 words. That was something in the second half where it was a good adjustment by West Virginia. They started playing much better in the second half. I think if there was one team that benefited the most schematically from that time to be like, okay, we need to regroup, it was West Virginia's secondary, because they started playing a lot better. There was only one or two plays where you felt like, Penn State's receivers got bullied on this play in single coverage. Outside that, it was more schematic things. But you mentioned Drew Aller, and Fitz brought this to my attention. Sal Wormley after the game about Drew Aller and his running ability in the game.
What do you think of Drew being able to extend those plays and get first downs with his feet?
Amazing. Yeah, because he's not the fastest, but as long as he get the job done, I'm happy.
It's a bit of a surprising to see him escape the pocket. Like I don't know if you saw the clips and stuff, but a bit of a surprise for that.
Yeah, I knew he had that in him. I haven't seen that.
His teammates didn't even know he had it in him.
Sal is the best. Like he's an underexposed personality on this team, just because he's just, oh shucks, man, here it is. So he puts it out there. He's been around for forever, and he does that. I talked to him after the game. He was great. So shout out to Sal Wormley on that one. But yeah, I mean, we did not know that the Drew was a runner thing would take off so quickly, and he took off pretty quickly. Got a couple of first downs, and again, it's not the design runs that will break you. It's the scrambles. And when you've got a guy like that doing what he can do with his arm, but also able to do enough with his legs, I mean, that's a big deal. When it makes him confident, and he slid, which is great, instead of taking on some of the hits that he took last year. When he does that, he's at his most confident. I mean, he looked like the guy that we saw in his high school film when he's just making plays and doing things, and
the arm angle was back.
Arm angle was back. He still got stuff to work on with footwork. He still got some ball placement. He threw a couple balls that were, I don't want to say ill-advised, but could have gone back against better defenses. But at the same time, I mean, for a week one performance, for the expectations where they were at, like, I think that's a good step forward for him.
Yeah, and the scrambling in the second half to not take a negative play and be decisive about when he was going to run. that was something even last year. It looked like he didn't have a good feel for when to run and when to break the pocket. He got a little bit better at it throughout the year, but this was decisive, confident Drew Aller, which I think is the most dangerous thing for opponents for Penn State football going forward. And players of the game for you guys.
When he's scrambling and can throw it away like he did the other day, and I hate the analysis of, wow, what a great throwaway. But yeah, that's a big deal in his development, like, because he's not trying to do too much and understanding the opponent that's ahead of him. We'll talk about how Penn State coached that way on Saturday as well. But that's a big deal in terms of getting him to where he needs to be at the next step. And he's still got improvement ahead of him, which is exciting.
I wanted to get into players of the game. For you guys, the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week was KJ Winston, and I don't know that he was the best safety on his own team, and that's no disrespect because they were both great. So, Fitz, I'm going to come back to you. Your players of the game on offense and defense.
It was funny. Nate and I had this conversation after the game the other day. He's like, so do we make it Drew or do we make it Nick? And I was like, well, how about Trey? And to me, if you got 3 guys in the running for performances like that, that's a pretty good thing. I believe you went with Trey in the highs and lows there. I think I'm inclined to believe and understanding and go with that because of how much we thought that Penn State's receivers had to go, and he did it. He was number 1. He stepped up, 2 touchdowns, 2 impressive touchdowns. Drew, of course, deserves his kudos. Nick took a big step with some big runs, and it was funny. Somebody posted the stats from last year's West Virginia game, and if you take Nick Singleton's 2 40-yard runs out of there, Penn State's right back where they were in terms of last year's rushing attack, which is interesting because last year's rushing attack also did not have 40-yard runs from Nick Singleton. So it kind of goes back to the old argument, one of the dumb arguments of going back to Saquon. It's like, well, you take his big runs out of it, and he's just kind of an average guy, and it's like, what are we doing? What are we smoking for that to be an analysis here? So you add big plays to it from Nick in the run game. We'll talk about the offensive line a little bit, but you got quality to great performances from all 3 of those guys. And that's a promising sign going forward because it wasn't a MAC team. No disrespect to Bowling Green, Kent State, whatever, but it was a tough situation to go in there to play a solid team that's probably not as good as they were last year, but a solid team that was going to come after you from the start.
Yeah. I just want to point this out. This is the Andy Kotelnicki effect in this offense. 92 of the 235 yards receiving were after the catch. So, yeah, Trey Wallace makes a lot of sense as a guy who led that effort with 8 yards after the catch per reception, an explosive number from him. Nate, do you want to follow up with any thoughts on that, or did we cover the Nate was rightness of that correctly?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I do think that Nick's broken runs, including the 40-yard touchdown could have been 80 if he had been at a different spot on the field, right? There was nobody that was going to catch him on that.
It could have been 99 if he did it from the 1. Yes.
That's all I'm saying. It's just, but I don't think it's worth getting too hung up. I do think it's interesting that he had 1 game of 100 yards rushing last year and did it in the first game this year, as opposed to the 4 he had as a true freshman. So I do think that it is significant for him to have had that success early. Again, this is a more of a team-wide thing, but setting the table for Drew to have that type of game, for Nick to have that type of game, for Trey, Omari, offensively specifically, I'm speaking of, I just think that the way that the schedule sets up, it now allows them to grow, right? Like they can expand, they can open up the tent to get more people involved in that this week and obviously after the bye, as well as get these guys an ego, get these guys some confidence as they move forward into October.
We're going to have a truncated BWI mailbag as the season goes on because we've got so many things to review with the previous game and so much stuff here on the show. But we're going to get to a couple of those. One comment from me when we talk about like what happened to the run game in the first half versus what happened to the passing game in the second half. West Virginia has something to say about that. In the first half, they were playing, Fitz, you mentioned it was cover 1 on that touchdown to Trey Wallace. They're not a cover 1 team. That's not what they do. They came out with a plan of stopping Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and they got shredded in the secondary. So in the second half, they played soft coverage, and they got shredded by Nick Singleton. That's what you want from your offense. It was a complete performance on both sides of the ball, even if it happened in different halves. I do want to get to one thing because there was a lot of really good play out on the field that isn't just the guys we've mentioned. So, Fitz, your underrated performances of the game.
Defensively, we probably saw more of Keziah Izzard and Alonzo Ford than we expected to see. Now it's a hot day, and Penn State did a great job with, I think, scheming up substitution patterns to slow down West Virginia because of that rule. When West Virginia and the offense, whatever offense takes or has a substitution on offense, you are granted a certain amount of time to get your subs in on defense. So take those big guys on an 85-degree humid day, get them some time off and get back in. That gives you time to scheme up for whatever West Virginia is going to do. It gives you time to basically set the pace for the offense. And for a guy like Garrett Green, who's a good player that's going to, frustrate you with his movement, that helps. So I think Penn State did a good job with that. But Izzard was better than I expected based on, just like preseason buzz, and there wasn't much talk about him, but he seemed to move down the line really well. We saw a lot of Alonzo Ford, saw a lot of rotation there. So I think that those are underrated performances on defense. Caden Saunders, underrated performance for a guy that did not play offense, a guy that missed a lot of August with an injury. Catching those punts is a big deal. Like I know I overemphasize special teams sometimes, but having him there, having the security blanket there just to catch a fair catch punt is a big deal. And I think he should be commended for that in terms of what he was able to do. We saw him in warmups. He wasn't doing much of anything, which led to me to believe he might not even play in the game at all. But to send him back there, to trust him back there to catch those punts is understated and not going to be looked at, but it's an important thing.
We got a lot of great stuff here in the BWI mailbag, so let's get to it. I'm going to answer this one quickly to start. You guys can have your opinion on this as well, but B. Harrell is a new member at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Want to welcome B. Harrell to the club. Be like B. Harrell. Join the site. We had some awesome new members that joined us over the last week, and we want to celebrate that. He says, "Hey, T. Frank, after doing your film review, who stood out to you, good or bad, from the O-line and quarterback room? Always have a hard time getting a read of those positions from TV broadcast." That's absolutely right. It is tough, especially with guards and centers, to understand what's going on the TV broadcast, and corners are almost never on the field. So from the offensive line perspective, I want to give a major shout out to Vega Ioane, who I thought had an underrated day. Some of the things he was doing on the interior were excellent. And playing with the anticipation and the speed mentally is what he needed to do to unlock his physical potential. I saw all of that. From the cornerback room, all of them. I thought they all played really well. Davian Collins gave up the one big play in the first half, and I can't stress to you enough how perfect of a throw and a catch that was.
Such a great catch. I watched that this morning, and I was like, man, he was right there. There was a couple of those that West Virginia made some good plays, and then KJ missed the pick that bounced right into the West Virginia player's hand. I mean, there's a lot that happened well for those outside guys for West Virginia.
Yeah. No. Do you have anybody on the offensive line you wanted to highlight?
Donka, I think that the tackles were better than we expected. I don't think they were overwhelming or anything like that. And I think they do need to improve in the run game when they see some of the better defensive fronts that they'll see. But they kept Drew pretty clean. Drew did have to scramble a couple of times, but I mean, you're looking at the number of dropbacks and the number of actual pressures. I mean, I thought it was really interesting from the start when he threw his first pass behind Omari. I mean, he had probably more time than he expected. And that was an interesting progression because he wanted to hit Tyler Warren in the flat right away. And actually, West Virginia did a really good job of taking that away. That was a point of emphasis there. They didn't do it on the fourth down, but the point of emphasis was taking away Tyler Warren on the quick stuff. And they did a great job of that. And then he came all the way across the field, found Omari, threw it behind him, was not a good throw. But that was the sort of thing that I didn't expect right out of the gate. The time to have progression from one side of the field to the other was surprising. And I think that's a credit to the tackles. Of course, I think some of those guys need to do a little bit more moving in the run game, but hey man, it's week one. There's a lot of week one stuff that was a lot cleaner than we expected, to be honest.
Somebody asked in the chat earlier what my thoughts on Nick Dawkins were. He set a higher bar after this game because I was concerned about his athleticism after what I watched last year. He He lost a couple reps to Fatorma Mulba, but he gave as good as he got, and I think that's an encouraging sign that he was more athletic and he was on point with what he was supposed to do. He just had some losses in the game, and you don't need to have 5 perfect offensive linemen. You need to have 5 good offensive linemen, and I think they're trending in that direction. Fitz, you've kind of made your opinions on this known throughout the show, but the Renegade says, I know this is super early, but was Penn State's win more of a Penn State looked good or West Virginia wasn't as good as we thought? Nate, what is your thought on this question? And he threw in the kicker of you got to pick one.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to your rules, the Renegade.
Of course.
I
think
the Renegade,
I think
Just
that
a Renegade. Sorry.
I think that pretty clearly it's both. And I hesitate on the Penn State is looking very good thing. I think that if we're being honest, certainly they didn't start great, right? There was offensively they didn't start great. Defensively, it was how do you put it, right? That if Neil Brown kicks field goals in certain spots, right? They got into the fringe red zone. Like West Virginia made it to the fringe red zone 4 times, 3 times. I don't know, 3 or 4.
It was 3 or 4
5 times. Yeah, so I think that against better teams, certainly more efficient offensive teams, there will be opportunities there that West Virginia wasn't able to cash in on. And certainly I understand the argument of the officiating ultimately leading to points on the scoreboard for West Virginia. I'm just more along the lines of the opportunities were there. West Virginia just wasn't able to get it through. So
4 times. Yeah,
4 times. So, is that end all be all? No. And it's not that bad of a thing, but I think it suggests a more vulnerable defensive position than what ultimately appeared on the scoreboard. And the same thing, right? So, was West Virginia bad? I don't think so. I don't think they're good. And I think Penn State is pretty good. I just think Penn State also has quite a lot of room to grow and reason to believe it can grow based on that performance.
Nailed the last part. Reason to believe that they can grow, because this is a starting point. This is not what you expect with the offense from here to game 12. It is a starting point. There's room to improve. You talk about K-Tron, you talk about those other receivers, maybe getting Tyler Warren more involved. Like there's room for improvement here. And what we saw from a play calling perspective, from a setting the table for the next play call perspective, Coach Nicky's got some stuff, man. He's got some. Yeah. He's got the ability to put to string some things together. Fewer wasted possessions, fewer wasted plays than we had grown accustomed to be seeing. But I will say, yes, it is a starting point. Like it was week 1. It was probably a smoother week 1 than we expected. It was an opponent that wasn't as good as they were made out to be.
Yeah.
And that was
the Big 12 is not as good as the Big 10 or the SEC. There's just no way around that.
You look at a lot of the feedback around Twitter, around the West Virginia side this week is like, they're not going to see another team built like that. Like they're going to see good teams, absolutely, but they're not going to see another team that's built like that when your backup defensive end is 6'6", 280 and coming off the corner and swatting the ball. So that is the big difference there. It is what we said it was going into the game last week, and it was just absolutely fascinating to watch. It made no sense whatsoever. That line kept coming down, and I hope some of you guys cashed in on that. But that line just kept coming down, and it's just like this team isn't going to be better than it was last year. And I came out of the game last year thinking, hey, West Virginia's pretty decent. This year, it's like they're not a complete team. It's going to be one of those teams that you're going to need your quarterback to do whatever it does or whatever he has to do to get you those wins.
Yeah. And I think those drives getting them down into the red zone and where they ended and how it felt like they were in the game for a while, I think is a credit to Garrett Green and his ability to keep those drives alive. Right. Nate, you got something?
Yeah. 3 things. The drive, Penn State scoring at the end of the half, Penn State opening after a 2.5-hour delay with a 6-minute touchdown drive, and then Penn State responding with the touchdown after West Virginia's second half touchdown. I thought that those were 3 perception altering instances, right? Yep. As opposed to as opposed to flat out domination, which yeah, there was some of that. I just think that Penn State rose to the occasion in ways that it didn't last year. It's tough to put your finger on, but you can say, like, I can easily make the argument and say, hey, if Omari doesn't catch that ball, it's a very different game for both teams going into a 2.5 hour rain delay.
Yeah.
And how do things happen on the backside of that? I don't know. But I think that it's worth crediting Omari and crediting Penn State and saying, hey, these are things that Penn State believed would happen last year. There is evidence of those things happening in practice. They just weren't able to translate it to the game field last year in the ways that they were on Saturday.
Let me jump in before point 2 and 3, because I think you've hit a transition here into this question. Almost everybody is crediting Andy Kotelnicki with that change. So GMAC14 says, not sure if this was discussed when he was hired, but does Andy Kotelnicki have head coach aspirations? Seems like Tom Allen is here for long-term on defense, and it's honestly hard to envision too many other offensive coordinator jobs that would be better. So just wondering about how many years at Penn State could you realistically expect out of Kotelnicki? Fitz, you usually have a rule about this. What are your thoughts?
I do have a rule. You expect 2 years from coordinators. Anything more is a bonus. If you get 1 year out of them, that means that 1 year probably went really good or really bad. Yeah. I would side with really good right now. And also never believe a coach who says he doesn't have head coaching aspirations, because that coach is lying to you. So that's where I would go with that. Ricky Ronnie said the same thing several years ago, and he's now in his 5th year at Old Dominion as the head coach. So those are my 2 rules on that. 2 years, and don't believe a head coach when he tells you, or a coordinator when he tells you he doesn't want to be a head coach or need to be a head coach. Oh boy.
Nate.
Tom Allen will stay as long as Penn State will have him, because he gets it and he understands that NIL has changed the number of programs that you can reasonably win at, including conference championships. And I think that he is more than happy to be out of that side of that world.
He has given some more indications, relief in that. But I think overall fits your point of 2 years, especially for an offensive coordinator. If Drew Aller's the number 1 overall pick, there's going to be 18 teams that want Andy Kotelnicki to be the head coach, because this is a guy that you saw 1 year and the other, and from a mentality perspective, Drew Aller looks the way you want him to look right now. Week 1, I know, don't overreact, but it's good signs so far. Good signs so far.
All right.
Yeah.
So
let's get
we're overreacting. No, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, so that's got to be our last one for the show today. Fitz, as always, he's the one that keeps his eye on the clock. Fitz, what do you got here to get us out of the show?
Not much. We've got a lot of stuff going on this week in terms of open practices on Wednesday. Of course, join us for the recruiting show on Thursday. We continue to and we're moving out of West Virginia, but with a MAC team, and no disrespect to Bowling Green, you're probably spending a little bit more time on West Virginia to think about what's the good stuff, what's the stuff that they got to come up with. And yeah, it's been a pretty constant stream since the end of the game on Saturday. So check out bluewhiteillustrated.com. We believe that you will be on board and impressed. So thank you to those of you that jumped on in the sales that we've had. You get to see Nate's smiling face every day. So thank you for that. True. And yeah, continue to comment and continue to follow. And of course, see you at Anti-Fragile this weekend.
Absolutely. That's a great goal for everybody. Have a beer with Fitz over at Anti-Fragile. That'll do it for the show today. And
Nate.
And well, Nate, I don't know. Your kids require more attention. You're always talking about how important they are and all that stuff.
School.
So
they're in
he can walk home. I can't. So that's a big difference. So yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Tomorrow
can keep me there all day. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, tomorrow we're going to be talking more about West Virginia from a different perspective, trying to get some of that thought. And then, of course, previewing the way we're going to preview Bowling Green is young players that we want to see this weekend and how we want to see them play. That's coming up on the BWI Live show tomorrow with myself and Greg Pickle. We'll see you then.